inclusion. So this idea of demystifying diversity, equity, inclusion is probably something we want to cover too, right?
Right. You know, giving people language that's accessible, kind of no matter where they are on their
On their
on their journey,
right.
or at their level of understanding.
Yep.
That you don't have to have a master's degree in DE&I to be able to implement some of the ideas.
Yeah. I mean, because when it comes down to it, a lot of these ideas are just basic, like good human interaction stuff.
Right. And
Right.
I think it lines up, you know, in one of our other conversations, we talked about that good management is, you know, and managing for diversity is just good management. It's,
Yep.
you know, it's meeting people where they're at, it's including the people who need to be at the table, and, you know, and finding approaches that connect with people.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. The other thing I think is, you know, so we have to talk about it, and we'll talk about it later, like the pushback on diversity, right?
Right.
Because that's the stuff that typically doesn't get talked about in large sessions or people don't bring up. But we have to help people recognize that reverse discrimination um, doesn't have to be a worldview,
right.
right? Like it doesn't have to permeate things or taint the relationships that I have with other people um, if I'm just trying to be an effective leader.
Right, and I think this notion that reverse discrimination is happening is out there. I mean, and you know, I was working with a group a few weeks ago, and a woman talked about all these, like, there was a leader hired in her organization who was hired only because she checked one of the boxes, was
Yep.
the phrase that she used, and then she used a bunch of other coded language about hiring incompetent people over competent people, and so now she feels like she's stuck teaching people these jobs, and that performance is suffering,
Yeah.
and she thinks it's directly linked to a diversity push.
Well, hopefully we'll kind of address some of these. Um, and the funny thing is, her experience may in fact be her experience, right? And so I can't say if she's right or wrong in that.
Yeah.
But what I do question, or I, you know, encourage anybody who feels that way is to kind of, you know, is that the rule or is that the exception?
Right.
And so whether I see that as the rule or the exception really determines how I interact with folks.
Right, and that was exactly where I was, because this was in a public class, and so as she started talking about that, I was like, okay, let's, you know, like, I can't say that her experience is wrong.
Right.
Because it is one possibility.
It is a possibility.
And so, you know, but what I tried to do was I tried to call out some of the coded language that she was using, and say, you know, is this the reality, or are you, you know, or is bias playing a role in this, you know?
Yeah.
And in an open enrollment class that's not focused on diversity.
Yeah. How did other people respond to her comments? Like, what was the mood or the attitude in the space?
She had a co-signer.
Okay.
So she had one person who jumped in, and from a different organization, who was like, yeah, you know, I see that in our organization too. And I was kind of taken aback based on other comments. But other people, as I often see when topics like that came up, they went and started looking at their handouts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I, you know, tried to find a path to get her to at least examine some of her comments and thoughts without, you know, knowing enough of the situation to really know where it's at.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny. I was just doing a session, and a person brought up all the coded language around reverse discrimination, right? And so some people think that it's just reverse discrimination, but it's way more subtle than that, right? It's, you know, people will say, well, they just got it because dot dot dot. Well, the the meta language, if you will, is that this is reverse discrimination, right? Or that we're only filling quotas, or that there's just one dimension of an individual that got them into the position, and it's limiting me, right? Is the thing, but what I really I tried to get him to kind of look at his own language and back off of that language a little bit so that we could actually get to some things that are more meaningful, but really challenging him to think about, we don't do so if people are doing things because it's politically correct, that's one thing, and that's on them, right? Or people perceive that, or they think that they're doing it just to fill a quota. I think both of those are missed opportunities to actually build on human relationships, right? But more importantly, what I was trying to share with this individual is that we want to do these things because they're the right things to do.
Exactly, and
right?
they build better teams, they build better organizations.
Yeah.
Teams and organizations that have broad diversity, and people who feel engaged and are willing to commit and do good work, they're better for it, right? And so, that's the key, is that the bias or the discrimination, the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion is really negatively impacting the bottom line, whether it's a mission-driven organization or, a for-profit organization. So really what you're talking about is having people who are willing to just put good teams together. And then do the work around those teams, because there is challenge when you diversify teams, no matter what aspect of diversity you're talking about. Diverse teams can be challenging.
It's so funny because oftentimes we go to sports as our metaphor, right? And so I come from the Bulls era of basketball and all that, and as good as Michael Jordan was, or is, or whatever, however people, he could not win a game by himself.
Right.
And I think for a long time, particularly when I was coming up in the 80s and 90s, there was this focus that the leader is the one who makes stuff happen, right? But what I found out in subsequent years and in actual practice is that the leader is the person who encourages people to do their best, which allows the leader to capitalize on their strengths.
Exactly,
right?
And to think strategically, to provide direction, mission, vision, those sorts of things, and then you put good people in place who make it happen.
Yeah.
Right. And I often don't use sports metaphors. I sometimes stay away from them. And I think about it from a construction. If you're going to build a house or a big building and you only have electrical engineers sitting in the room, you're not going to be successful building that building.
No.
Right? So you need multiple types of engineers, you need architects, you need construction foremans, you need people who are going to be the end users. And because if you miss any one of those, and probably others, you're going to create problems, and so you're not going to get to the best solution. And diversity, however you measure it and however you define it for a specific organization, is just that. It's bringing different viewpoints around the table and getting to the best solutions.
Yeah. And I wonder, even using if we use a sports metaphor, or a construction metaphor, how much of those people who are participating, folks are questioning their skill and their ability, right? So, so when we go to, I'll just stick with the sports metaphor, right? So we go to that game, they may or may not demonstrate their best in every game,
Right.
but the question of their qualifications for being a part of that team is never really part of the discussion, right? The same with construction. I haven't ever built a house, but I don't go to the construction site and ask people for all their certificates, because there's a certain level of competency. Because they're there, I'm taking into consideration.
Yep, and it's not until they prove that they don't do good work or they don't perform on the basketball court that they get traded or they lose their job. You know, there is that expectation that they've earned their way there.
Yeah.
Rather than starting from that spot of like, do you really belong here?
Yep.
You know, and I totally believe that.
Yeah.
Or how did you get here?
Or how did you get? Yeah. Did you check a box?
Exactly.
You know?
That little bit of sideways of like, no, exactly why?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's. I'm gonna stop this recording.
Yep.